I was 6 when my father died. At least, that's what I believed for 32 years of my life. The funeral is burned into my memory like a scar you can't stop touching. I remember the smell of lilies, how they made me nauseous, how I've avoided them ever since.
I remember my mother's black dress, the way it rustled when she bent down to whisper in my ear. Dad is gone to heaven, sweetheart.
He's watching over us now. Her voice was hollow, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. I remember my tiny patent leather shoes, how they pinched my feet as I stood beside that polished wooden box, wondering why Daddy was sleeping in there when his bed at home was still unmade. The preacher talked about a man I didn't recognize, a hero, a saint, a devoted husband and father taken too soon. But all I could think about was how Daddy's coffee mug was still sitting on the kitchen counter, half empty and growing cold. The house felt different after that day. Quieter. My mother moved through our rooms like a ghost, touching his things but never moving them. His razor stayed on the bathroom sink. His work boots remained by the back door, still muddy from whatever job site he'd left that final morning. For months, I would sit by the window waiting for his pickup truck to rumble into our driveway, convinced everyone had made a terrible mistake. Your father was a good man, she would tell me on the nights when I cried for him. He worked so hard for us. He loved us so much. She would stroke my hair and her tears would fall onto my forehead, warm and salty. You have his eyes, baby. Every time I look at you, I see him. As I grew up, he became larger than life in our house. Saint Michael, we should have called him.
The perfect father who never got to disappoint Emil, never got to be human.
Every report card, every school play, every milestone, Mom would look at me with those sad, proud eyes and say, he would have been so proud. He became the ghost I measured every man against, the standard no one could meet because dead fathers don't have flaws. I was 28 when I started therapy. Dr. Brennan had kind eyes and a voice that made you want to tell her your secrets. Tell me about your father, she would say, and I would recite the same story I'd been telling myself for decades.
The tragic hero.
The devoted family man. The loss that defined me. Have you ever been angry at him? She asked during one session.
The question caught me off guard.
Angry at a dead man? That seems pointless. Grief isn't always just sadness, Sarah. Sometimes it's rage with nowhere to go. She was right, of course.
I was furious.
Furious that he left us. Furious that he never got to walk me down the aisle, never got to meet his grandchildren, never got to just be there. But you can't fight a ghost. You can't have it out with a memory. So the anger just sat in my chest like a stone, growing heavier with each passing year. I was 38, cleaning out Mom's attic after her stroke, when I found the shoebox. It was tucked behind the Christmas decorations, covered in dust and spider webs. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to my mother, all postmarked after my father's funeral. My hands shook as I opened the first one. The handwriting was familiar, masculine, slanted to the right the way Dad used to write grocery lists. Helen, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I had to try. Is Sarah okay? Does she ask about me? I think about her every day. I think about both of you. I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry.
Michael.
The letter was dated 3 months after the funeral. 3 months after I had watched them lower his casket into the ground. 3 months after I had thrown dirt onto the wooden lid and whispered goodbye to my daddy. I opened another letter. Then another. They spanned 2 years, each one more desperate than the last. He asked about my first day of school. He mentioned seeing a little girl at the grocery store who reminded him of me. He begged my mother to let him explain. In the last letter, his handwriting looked different.
Shekia.
More defeated. Helen.
I want vritte anumore.
I can see that this is just making it harder for you.
Tell Sarah I love her.
Tell her that leaving was the biggest mistake of my life, but that I thought it was the only way. I was wrong about so many things. I hope she grows up strong like her mother. I hope she never doubts that she was loved.
Michael.
I sat in that dusty attic for hours, reading and rereading those letters until the words blurred together. My mother had let me believe he was dead. She had staged a funeral, bought a headstone, let me grieve a living man for 32 years. I confronted her that night in the hospital. She was still weak from the stroke, her words slurred but her eyes sharp as ever.
You lead to me, I whisperet, holding the letters like evidence in atrial.
For 32 years, you let me think he was dead. She closed her eyes, and for a moment I thought she might deny it. Then she looked at me with such sadness that I almost regretted bringing it up. He was dead to us, she said quietly. The man I married, the father you knew, he died the day he walked out that door. What good would it have done to tell you he was living some other life somewhere else? You should have let me decide that. You were 6 years old, Sarah.
Barbies don't get to decide things like that.
That night, I went home and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. I typed his name into the search bar and held my breath. Michael Thompson was common enough that hundreds of results popped up, but I knew what I was looking for. And then I found him. The photo was small, part of a local news article about a charity baseball game. But it was definitely him. Older, grayer, wearing a smile I remembered from my childhood. The caption read, Michael Thompson with his family at the annual Little League fundraiser. His family. In the background, I could make out a woman with short blonde hair and 2 teenagers.
A boy and a girl, Maybe 15 and 14.
They looked happy. They looked whole. They looked like the family I thought I had once been. I stared at that photo until my eyes burned. This man, my father, my dead father, was coaching Little League games and attending fundraisers with children who weren't me. He was living the life he was supposed to live with us, just with different people in our places. The little girl in the photo had his eyes.
The same eyes I saw in the mirror every morning.
The same eyes my mother said reminded her of him. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of my kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the clock on the wall. Somewhere, 3 states away, my father was probably tucking those children into bed, maybe reading them a story the way he used to read to me. The grief I thought I had processed, the loss I thought I had accepted, cracked open like an old wound. But this time, it wasn't just sadness flooding out. This time, it was something else entirely.
So meeting rau and burning and alive.
What if he never died? What if everything I thought I knew about my life, about myself, about the hole his absence had carved in my chest, was built on a lie? What if my father hadn't died at all? What if he had just chosen to be dead to me? I couldn't eat for 3 days after I found that photo. Every time I tried to swallow food, I thought about him sitting around a dinner table with strangers, asking about their day, helping with homework, being present in ways he never was for me after I turned 6. I called in sick to work, which I never do. I sat on my couch in the same pajamas, refreshing his Facebook page obsessively, studying every photo like I was preparing for an exam. There he was at a high school graduation. The boy in a cap and gown beaming, my father's arm around his shoulders. There he was teaching the girl to drive, both of them grinning through the windshield of a blue sedan. The woman's name was Linda. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital and posted cheerful updates about 5K runs and book club meetings. The kids were Jake and Emma. Jake played baseball and wanted to study engineering. Emma was in drama club and had just gotten braces. They looked like any normal American family. They looked happy. They looked like us before. On the 4th day, I drove to my mother's house. She was back from the hospital but still fragile, moving carefully through the rooms like she might break if she moved too fast. I found him, I said without preamble. She was making tea, her hands shaking slightly as she poured the hot water. She didn't look surprised. Where?
Kentucky.
He has a wife. 2 kids. They look like they're in high school now. She sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd done homework while she made dinner, where we'd eaten birthday cake for 2 every year on my birthday.
How long have you known?
I asked. Known what? That he had another family. She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. Then she sighed, the sound coming from somewhere deep in her chest. I hired a private investigator about 10 years ago. I needed to know if he was still alive, for insurance purposes.
Legal things.
And the man told me he was married. Had been for 15 years at that point. Had 2 children. She looked up at me, her eyes hollow. I never told you because what good would it have done? He made his choice, Sarah. He chose them over us.
The words hit me like a physical blow.
He left us for another family?
No.
She shook her head. No, that's not. It's more complicated than that. She went to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a manila envelope, yellowed with age. Inside was a letter from his brother, someone I'd never heard of. Helen. Mike asked me to write this. He wants you to know why he left. He was in debt. Bad debt. The kind that comes with threats to families. He owed money to some people who don't take no for an answer. They came to the house that day, the day before he left. They made it clear that if he didn't pay up, they'd come for you and Sarah. He panicked. He thought if he disappeared, if he made it look like he was dead, they'd leave you alone. He thought he was protecting you. He's been living under a different name. He got married a few years ago to a woman who doesn't know about his past. He has kids with her now. He wanted you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing he ever did. And the stupidest.
Danny Thompson.
I read the letter twice before I looked up at my mother. She was crying silently, tears dripping into her teacup. He was protecting us, I said, though the words felt strange in my mouth. That's what he told himself. But protection would have been going to the police. What he did was run away and let us think he was dead. I spent the next week in a haze of research and planning. I found his address, a tidy colonial on Maple Street in a town called Millbrook. I found the high school where Jake and Emma went to school, the little league field where he coached, the diner where Linda posted photos of their Sunday breakfast tradition. I told my boss I needed family leave. I told my friends I was taking a solo vacation to clear my head. I told myself I just needed to see him, just once, to understand. But I knew I was lying. I was planning a confrontation 32 years in the making. The drive to Kentucky took 8 hours. I checked into a motel on the outskirts of town and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the address I'd written on a scrap of paper.
1247 Maple Street.
The place where my father tucked other children into bed. I drove past the house twice before I got the courage to park across the street. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the yard was scattered with the debris of a normal family life. A bicycle lying on its side, a basketball hoop over the garage, flower boxes under the windows.
I satt in my car for an hour before I SAV him.
He came out the front door carrying a toolbox, looking exactly like the man in the Facebook photos but somehow smaller in person. Time had softened his edges, put gray in his hair and lines around his eyes, but he still moved the way I remembered. Behind him came the girl, Emma, carrying what looked like pieces of a bookshelf. She was laughing at something he'd said, her face bright with the kind of uncomplicated affection I'd once felt for him too. "Need help with that, Em?" he called out, and his voice carried across the street to where I sat frozen in my rental car. It was the same voice that used to read me bedtime stories. The same voice that used to sing silly songs while he pushed me on the swing set in our backyard. They worked together for 20 minutes, assembling what turned out to be a bookshelf on the front porch. He was patient with her mistakes, encouraging when she got frustrated, proud when she got something right. He was being the father I remembered him being with me, before everything fell apart. When they finished, he wrapped his arm around her shoulders and they stood back to admire their work. She leaned into him the way I used to lean into him, trusting and secure in the knowledge that he would always be there. Except he wasn't always there. Not for her, not really. Because being there for her meant he wasn't there for me. A red pickup truck pulled into the driveway, and Jake climbed out wearing a baseball uniform. He walked over to them, said something that made them all laugh, and then all three of them headed toward the backyard. I heard the sound of a screen door slamming, the kind of domestic sound that makes a house feel like home. I wanted to follow them. I wanted to march up to that front door and ring the doorbell and watch his face when he saw me. I wanted to ask him if he ever wondered what I looked like now, if he ever thought about the bedtime stories he never read me, the baseball games he never coached for me. Instead, I started my car and drove to the town park. I sat on a bench and called my therapist's emergency line. Dr. Brennan answered on the third ring. "I found him," I said, and then I started crying. Not the quiet, dignified tears I'd been shedding all week, but the ugly, choking sobs of a 6-year-old who finally understood that Daddy wasn't coming home. Where are you? Kentucky. I'm sitting in a park in Kentucky, watching my dead father live his life with his other family. He has a daughter, Dr. Brennan. She's probably 15, and she gets to have him every day. She gets to build bookshelves with him and lean on his shoulder and trust that he'll always be there. And I got 6 years before he decided we weren't worth staying for. We talked for an hour. She reminded me of all the work we'd done, all the progress I'd made in understanding that his leaving wasn't about my worth as a daughter but about his inability to face his own mistakes. But sitting there in that park, watching other families push their children on swings and teach them to ride bikes, all I could think about was the fact that somewhere in this town, my father was probably helping his son with homework or asking his daughter about her day. I drove back to his house just as the sun was setting. This time, the whole family was in the front yard. Jake was throwing a football to my father while Emma and Linda sat on the porch steps. It was so perfectly, heartbreakingly normal. I watched them until the streetlights came on and they gathered their things to go inside. I watched Linda kiss my father's cheek as she passed him on the porch steps. I watched him ruffle Jake's hair and remind Emma to bring her books inside. I sat there until midnight, staring at the dark windows of his house, trying to decide what I was going to do. Was I going to knock on his door and destroy the life he'd built? Was I going to drive home and pretend I'd never found him? The answer came to me as I watched a light come on in what I guessed was his bedroom. A shadow moved past the window, him, getting ready for bed, probably kissing his wife goodnight, probably checking on his children one more time. Tomorrow, I was going to tell him I knew. Tomorrow, I was going to make him look at me, his first daughter, the one he'd let believe he was dead. Tomorrow, I was going to make him explain himself to the 38-year-old woman who had spent her entire adult life trying to understand why she wasn't enough to make him stay. Tomorrow, I was going to knock on his door. Tomorrow, I was going to resurrect myself in his life the same way he'd been resurrected in mine. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my motel room, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing what I would say to him. By morning, I had written and rewritten my speech a dozen times, but nothing felt adequate. How do you condense 32 years of grief, anger, and abandonment into a conversation? At 9 a.m., I drove to his house. Jake's car was gone, probably at baseball practice. Emma's bicycle was still in the yard, and I could see movement through the kitchen window.
A normal Sunday morning in a normal family home.
I sat in my car for 20 minutes, engine running, ready to flee if my courage failed me. But then the front door opened and he came out to get the newspaper, wearing a bathrobe and slippers, looking so ordinary and human that something inside me snapped. This was not the heroic figure my mother had painted, or the villain I'd imagined during my sleepless nights. This was just a middle-aged man in a bathrobe, starting his Sunday with coffee and news, blissfully unaware that his past was sitting across the street in a rental car. I turned off the engine and walked across the street on unsteady legs. He was bent over the newspaper when my shadow fell across the page. He looked up with mild curiosity, then saw my face. The newspaper slipped from his hands. His mouth fell open. "Sarah," he whispered, like he wasn't sure I was real. "Hello, Dad." He looked around frantically, then grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the side of the house, away from the windows where his family might see us. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" The internet makes it pretty easy to find dead people who are actually alive. He leaned against the side of the house like his legs might give out. "You know. I know a lot of things now. I know you didn't die in a car accident when I was 6. I know you've been living here under your real name. I know you have a wife who posts pictures of your Sunday breakfasts and 2 kids who think you're the greatest dad in the world. Sarah, I can explain." "Can you?" "Because I've been trying to understand for weeks now, and I keep coming back to the same question. Was it easier to let me think you were dead than to figure out how to be my father?" His face crumpled. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Dad? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you decided your first family was too much trouble, so you went and got yourself a second one."
You don't understand.
There were people, dangerous people. I read Uncle Danny's letter. I know about the debt, about the threats. And you know what? Maybe leaving was the right choice. Maybe we were safer without you. But you didn't have to let us think you were dead. Your mother wouldn't have let me go if she knew I was alive. So you made the choice for her. For both of us. You decided we were better off grieving a dead hero than knowing we had a living coward for a husband and father. The word hit him like a slap. I'm not a coward. Aren't you? You were too scared to face your creditors, too scared to face the consequences of your choices, too scared to tell your new family the truth about your past.
Behint US, I hørte skrin door slem.
We both turned to see Emma standing on the back porch, looking confused. Dad? Who's that? He looked at me with panic in his eyes, silently begging me not to destroy his carefully constructed world. But I was done protecting him from the consequences of his choices. I'm your sister, I said. Emma's face went blank. My what? Emma, go inside, my father said quickly. But Emma didn't move. She was staring at me, searching my face for familiar features. You have Dad's eyes, she said quietly.
Yeah, Ida.
The back door opened again, and Linda came out. Mike? What's going on? He looked between Linda and Emma, then at me, and I watched 30 years of lies catch up with him all at once.
Linda, this is Sarah.
She's my daughter.
Your daughter.
Linda's voice was barely a whisper. From your first marriage. Before I met you. Emma looked like she might faint.
You wäre married before.
Why haven't we ever met her? Linda asked, and there was something sharp in her voice now. It's complicated, he said weakly. It's really not, I said. He left us when I was 6. Let us think he was dead. I've spent 32 years grieving a father who was actually living here, raising you guys and pretending his first family never existed. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's face had gone pale. You let people think you were dead? I can explain. You have a daughter who thought you were dead for 30 years, and you never told me? Jake chose that moment to come home from baseball practice. He walked into the backyard, still wearing his uniform, and stopped short when he saw us. What's going on? He asked. Emma's voice was small. Jake, that's our sister. Our what? And so the explanation started again. I watched my half-brother's face go through the same progression of emotions. Confusion, disbelief, anger, hurt. You have another daughter? Jake said when the story was finished. Yes. And we never knew about her because you faked your own death? You abandoned your family and then lied to us about it for our entire lives. Emma burst out, and I was surprised by the anger in her voice. I was trying to protect everyone, he said desperately. Protect us from what?
Linda demanded.
From knowing that you're capable of abandoning your children? He didn't have an answer for that. How could he? I had been silent through most of this, watching his new family grapple with the same betrayal I'd been processing for weeks. But now, seeing him cornered and desperate, I felt something unexpected, pity. He was scared, I said quietly, and everyone turned to look at me. He was in over his head, and he was scared, and he made a choice that seemed easier than facing the truth. I'm not defending you, I continued, looking at him. I'm just saying I understand now. You weren't evil. You weren't calculating. You were just weak. The word hung in the air between us. For 32 years, I've been trying to understand why I wasn't enough to make you stay. And the answer is that it was never about us. It was about you. You were too weak to face your mistakes, too weak to fight for your family, too weak to handle the mess you'd made of your life. I looked at Linda and the kids. He probably loves you. In his way, I think he loved us too. But love wasn't enough to make him strong. What do you want from us? Jake asked, exhaustion in his voice. I don't want anything from you. You didn't do anything wrong. You're just kids who got caught in the aftermath of his choices. I turned to my father. I wanted to see you. I wanted to understand. I wanted you to look at me and explain how you could walk away from your daughter and then go on to be father of the year to someone else. I've thought about you every single day for 32 years, he said quietly. I've wondered what you looked like, what you were interested in, whether you were happy. I've carried the weight of leaving you every single day of my life. But not enough to come back. Not enough to let me know you were alive. I didn't think you'd want to see me. I was 6 years old. I wanted my daddy to come home more than I wanted anything in the world. But you decided for me. You decided I was better off thinking you were dead. I wiped my eyes, surprised to find them wet. Do you know what the worst part is? It's not that you left. The worst part is that you robbed me of the chance to be angry properly. You can't fight with a ghost. You can't demand answers from a dead hero. I looked around at his family.
I don't want to destroy your life.
I don't want to hurt your kids. But I needed him to know that I survived. That I grew up. That I became someone despite the hole he left in my world. I turned back to him one final time. I'm not asking for anything from you now. I'm not asking you to choose me over them, or to make up for lost time. I just needed you to see me. To know that the little girl you left behind grew up to be strong enough to find you, strong enough to face you, and strong enough to walk away again.
Sarah, please.
No. You had 32 years to reach out. You had 32 years to tell the truth.
You don't get to ask ML for anything now.
I looked at Linda and the kids one more time. I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry your father is a liar. But you deserved to know the truth. I walked toward my car, my legs steadier now than they'd been in weeks. Behind me, I could hear them talking in urgent, hushed voices, but I didn't turn around. As I drove away from that house, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not closure, exactly, but clarity. My father wasn't a hero or a villain. He was just a man who had made terrible choices and lived with the consequences. The little girl in me had needed to see him, to understand that he was real and flawed and human. But the woman I had become didn't need him anymore. 3 months later, Emma sent me a friend request on Facebook. We started talking, carefully at first, then with growing warmth. She told me that our father had finally told Linda and Jake the whole truth. That Linda had asked him to move out while she decided what to do. That Jake was struggling with trust issues. That she was in therapy. I'm sorry, she wrote to me one day. I'm sorry he did that to you. I'm sorry we got the father you should have had. You didn't steal anything from me, I wrote back. You were just kids. He's the one who made the choices. We're getting to know each other now, my sister and I. We're building something new from the wreckage of his lies. She's smart and funny and brave, and I find myself grateful that she exists, even if the circumstances of our meeting were devastating. Our father tries to reach out sometimes. He sends letters that I don't read, emails that I delete. He's tried to friend me on social media, but I've blocked him. I'm not ready for that conversation, and I may never be. But I'm not waiting for him anymore. I'm not measuring other men against the ghost of who I thought he was. I'm not carrying the weight of his choices. He died for me again, but this time, I was alive enough to bury him with the truth.